This is episode 83 of the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I'm Carly Cade, and today I'm speaking with Melissa A. Priblo Chapman. Melissa is a freelance writer who has had work published in magazines including The Western Horse, Good Dog, and Doggone. Her story, Gypsy Cross Country Dog, appears in the book Traveler's Tales, A Dog's World, alongside the work of such renowned authors as John Steinbeck and Gary Paulson. Chapman has been a paid speaker to over 100 organizations in regard to her solo cross-country trip and is a member of the Long Riders Guild, a worldwide league of equestrian adventurers. Chapman is a married mother of 4 and lives in upstate New York. She rides every day and continues to share life with her horses and dogs. Distant Skies, An American Journey on Horseback is her first full-length book. Now, let's get into the interview. Welcome to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast, a podcast featuring interviews with equestrian authors who love all things horses and writing about them. In each episode, you'll hear inspirational stories from horsebook authors, including writing advice and marketing tips to help you write your very own horsebook. If you're an author, aspire to be an author, or simply love horsebooks, then you are in the right place. I'm your host, Carly Cade, and creative writing makes my spurs jingle. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I've got a great show for you today. I am so excited to have Melissa A. Priblo Chapman. She is the author of Distant Skies, and I'm telling you, this is like my favorite read of last year, and I'm so excited to have her on the show. Welcome, Melissa. I can't wait to get into the interview with you.
Well, hi, Carly. Thank you for having me.
Melissa's listened to the show, and for everybody else who listens, how I always love to kick the conversation off is like the very best question on earth. Melissa, how did your love affair with horses begin?
That is always the classic question, and there's probably going to be other people out there nodding their heads. As far back as I can remember, I was one of those little kids, and people say the word obsessed a lot these days, but I was definitely obsessed. I think I remember a teacher in about 3rd or 4th grade telling my parents, can you get her to like pick a spelling word or write a sentence that isn't about horses? And that was all I thought about. And I always say, people told my parents, some little girls do that, but they outgrow it. And here we are. So some of us do not outgrow that, right?
And I think so many authors that write about horses and listeners who are interested in horses and love horses too can totally relate. We don't know where it comes from. I think, we come out that way and then our parents don't know what to do with us, and it just kind of takes on a life of its own. And most of us, we may step away from it during our college years or something, which you didn't. And I'm excited to talk about, but we always come back. Somehow we always come back and have to have horses in our lives.
That is true.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, your book was just magical to me. And, I really want to open the dialogue and start talking about Distant Skies, An American Journey on Horseback. This is a part American road trip, part coming of age story, total adventure, and part uncommon love story. Talk to us about Distant Skies. Give us a little summary of this book.
Well, it's funny, when people first started referring to it as a memoir, it surprised me because I always pictured a memoir being, how you grew up. And I realized that it can be any like life experience. Mm-hmm. So to me, it felt like a lot of different things. And I couldn't, as you know, the trip that the book is about took place in the early 80s, which was a while ago, modern day still, but a while ago. And I couldn't let go of the idea of how much the different situations and events and connections and things that happened affected me, and that I thought other people would want to know. But people kept being interested in it even years afterwards. I was getting asked to speak, and it felt sort of like my story, but so many people were so interested in it for so long. And I think that there was some thread through it about perseverance and keeping going when things were rough that I thought would apply to other things and other people's dreams, that maybe it would help someone. So it kind of inspired me to just keep writing and keep pecking away at it.
Yeah, and it's no surprise that people wanted you to talk about this story when you returned, and even years after, you did get a lot of news coverage during this. But this is about, you decided at 23 years of age to embark on a solo cross-country horseback journey that would span over 26,000 miles, beginning in New York State and ending in California. And this is a time of no cell phones, no
Yep.
GPS, no trucks that follow behind you with supplies. I mean, this was you on your own with your animal companions.
Yep.
What inspired you at 23 to leave your life behind and go out on this adventure?
You know what? At the time, I touch upon this a little bit in the book. I I thought that I was grown. I was 23 years old, and I just felt like, well, first of all, first it was a dream. Like it was my daydream and my fantasy that was like I talked about in the prologue, being a little kid in the car and just looking out the window, and like probably a lot of horse lovers, I knew where every horse place was and all that. But I felt this pull towards the places that were natural, and maybe not even just natural, but just sort of outdoors and it just, like I said, I would see trails and dirt roads, and our car would speed by, and I would just be looking out there, and I wanted to see where they went. I wanted to feel what it felt like to be there, but those thoughts always included being on a horse. I'm a hiker also. I hike with my dogs quite a bit, but as you know, there is nothing like horses are very of the senses, and when you're outdoors, you're very out in the open, but also they don't miss anything. I read a quote somewhere that someone said, being out in the woods without my dogs or horses was like going to an art museum without my glasses on, because they see everything and they hear everything, and it spreads to you. And sometimes that's not good if you have a high strung horse or something, but it was sort of that sort of sharing and that connection that they had, because even though they're domestic animals, they still have quite a bit of their hooves in that outside world too, so it's kind of neat that we get to go through that with them. So that called to me, and then by the time I was that age, that's a funny age, like there's all these mommy blogs and all these things about little kids and the terrible twos, and I'm always like, somebody needs to be talking to moms that have kids in their late teens and their early 20s, because the world sort of goes, okay, you're grown up now, have a
Mhm.
career, get married, have a house, whatever, and you have such little world experience for the most part, and I think now that I'm an adult looking back on that, I think that was also a way for me. I just sort of found my own way to make that step from being a younger person to an adult. And, some people it's college, some people it's a career, start a business. And it was just sort of this thing that just kept calling to me at that age. I dreamed about it and I talked about it. And it just sort of came around that time that I started thinking, why aren't you trying it? Like it is against the odds, it is unusual, but it's certainly not impossible. Like I
Mhm.
had people say, how could a horse get to California or something? But I always say, but how did they get there in the first place? Like our
Sure.
whole country is built upon the interstate system is only since like Eisenhower in the 50s, Before that, everything was back roads and dirt roads and lanes, and they're still there, they're less used and so on. So that was kind of the basis that I started sort of pushing myself, like, let's just make this happen, see what happens. So
It seems to me from, the answers to the questions that you provided and just this conversation is like this is a calling. Mhm.
it's funny that you chose that word, because I mentioned several times that there's stories that aren't in the book, of course, because we lived out there for months. But there was a gentleman in Pennsylvania, and and this was the other neat thing that introduced me to. It's almost like everybody has a story. There was something about, I think, because I was vulnerable and I was following my dream, people would talk to me about these things. And this guy had built a channel catfish pond in his yard, and it was all this sort of like interesting, and he said he just had a call to do it. And he said, I think you've had a call. And usually people, when they hear that, it means like religious connotations. But he said, no, it doesn't have to be that. It's just something that you feel driven to do, driven to make it happen and not give up. And I'm like, well, that sort of fits, because especially in the beginning, it was very difficult. There's a lot of happy stories and freedom and the bond with the horse, but there's a like it was almost like a friend of mine said, it was like a ripping away of leaving behind everything, and there were times in the beginning that I had to really, it was a tough adjustment, so hearing other people's stories and someone else saying you just feel a call, you have to answer it, and shortly after being on the road, I would meet people that would because I was meeting a lot of people, especially like I always say the whole first half of the book is kind of like general store and the diners and the nice farmers. And then the second half from like Western Kansas on is like, okay, you're out there. This is getting rugged. You know what I mean? But we were meeting so many people at first in the East. And I met so many people that said, oh, I had a dream. I always wanted to. And it could be anything. And then they'd say, but I'm too old, but I got married, but it's too much money. And I just thought, well, I don't know if we're going to make it, but at least I'm not going to have that, but I'll at least know I tried, you know? And so I learned that very young, you know, that at 23 years old, like, at least you're trying, you know? So,
Yeah, and kudos to you for feeling that pull, recognizing that pull, and doing it. I mean, this is an exceptional story. Like literally, I was so moved by your persistence and your deep connection you had to your animal companions. You know, let's talk a little bit about persistence, but then also like let's talk about how taking on this adventure really changed your view of building relationships with animals. You know, I'd like to hear your thoughts on both of those.
what I think I learned from that was I knew, and that's why I left the stories in there of how I first saw Rainy, because I felt like something special happened.
Mm,
And same thing with Gypsy. And I
mhm,
left those stories in there because it seemed important because I did have a horse and he was an older horse. I knew he wasn't going and I loved him and was happy to have him. You know, people sometimes talk about their husband and they go love at first sight. My mind always goes Rainy. Like, you know what I mean? Like that was this moment where I was like, I have to do this. And I am not impulsive, which is interesting because some people think, oh, you're a big adventurer, you're wild and crazy. I'm not. Like I weigh things and I'm careful. But that was something that I just felt very strongly about. So we started out in a good way because I sort of believed in that. And I want to say clearly, I personally will always think that Rainy and Gypsy were exceptional. I never met a horse or a dog like that, and I probably never will again. So I believe that. But I also wonder what would any of our horse, dog, mule relationships be if we suddenly lived with them like that 24 hours a day? So it's like sort of this spending of time with them and not just like feed them, ride for an hour just to work them out and you know, and it's almost like this like hanging out with them. And so the trip threw me into that and we got so bonded that I just felt like we could read each other's minds.
absolutely. And yeah, it's like there's a connectivity that you experience when you're really being with your animals. And I also heard slowing down, right? That's what animals to me do. They like slow
Yep.
you down, they get you present, they pick up on your energy, they shift
Yep.
your energy. And you had a lot of those experiences throughout this book. Rainy and Gypsy and Amanda were exceptional animals, and they had an exceptional person in charge caring for them along the way. Rainy made that entire journey without a hint of lameness, you know,
Yep.
and
No lameness. People ask about that all the time. He had obviously I couldn't tell every time, but he had his shoes, you know, reset obviously
mhm.
several times. But he never that horse never took a lame step. By the time Amanda was with us, there was a little minor thing. And the minute she started like pulling back a little, I was like, she's telling me something. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? And
yeah.
to this day, you know what? I don't have that opportunity to live with them like I did with those guys from the trip. But I have a great horse now that reminds me a little of Rainy, and he's a super trustworthy, solid citizen. And I still ride alone out in the woods and so on. And there's a trail up the road from here that goes into the woods, and we've been there a million times. And one day he stopped and his head went up and all the, you know, high alert signs. And I tried to squeeze him forward and he kind of spun around. And I was like, you know what? He's not a new horse. He's not a young horse. And there are trainers that would say, don't let him call the shots. But if you build that bond, I was like, he knows something I don't know. I'm not going to let him run off or something. But we circled around a little bit and then I left. And I remember saying to my husband the next day, I have to ride back up there today just to make sure and he was fine. So I don't know, maybe there was a bear, maybe there was something, but it's like when you get that bonded enough, you don't have, you're still the leader, but you should also listen to them. That's
Mhm.
their world out there in the fields and the woods and stuff. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to give them that credit. I mean, I don't recommend that for every horse, every situation. You know, I have to be careful with that, but it's like I said, you evaluate. He's a good buddy. He's been up there. He's not one that was looking to test and challenge you. He was saying something in that darker part of the woods. I don't want to go in there today. And the next day he was fine. So that's an example that You don't have to be on a long journey to sort of build that, hopefully, with them. And I'm learning also too, or have had to learn over the years, that not all of them are great candidates for that. Like I don't know if you go to any of these clinics, like I go to Equine Affair and Horse World Expo, and sometimes, and there's some great learning opportunities there, but sometimes the gist is we can get any horse to do anything, and a great trainer can do that. And I am not a trainer, and you're looking for that match. You know what I mean? I have a new horse that I bought not too long ago as I was searching, and she's a nice horse, but she's real unhappy out there alone. And I have to sort of, because she's new, I view it as a trial. And you have to sort of sometimes go, she might not be perfect for that. You know what I mean? So, it does take personality and everything, but time is the best you can give to gain that and grow that with horses, I think.
I totally agree with you. A partnership between an animal and a human is very, very special. And
Yep.
there's a couple things you said there. I love that you just had this instinct about Rainey and Gypsy, and then bringing Amanda along, and then this trip. So it was like kind of like this magical experience. But I also want to note that you took incredible care of your animals during this trip. I mean, they were
Well,
the
thank
first thing you thought of. And it was very clear in the book that these, because people think about such a long journey and they're like, well, that's a lot to put on, a horse. But you thought of them first before anything else. They always had water, they had veterinary care, they had the farriers. You took it slow, you gave them a rest when they needed to, and you had this grand adventure together, and your bonds just completely grew and merged. And this, I mean, they're obviously irreplaceable. I mean, this whole book was, my heart
Thank you.
so full.
I feel like that they were first. It's like the old, when I was a kid, I loved, you might not be shocked to hear that I loved what westerns, and the whole idea of that. I remember my dad, old fashioned, this was probably the 60s or early 70s, taking my brother to see True Grit, and I started crying. I didn't even know what the story was, but I knew there was horses in it, and they took me along. So I had that sort of idea, like, you take care of your horse first. Once in a while, a reporter or something would say, now, if this horse gets hurt, will you get another horse and go on? And it was always surprising to me. And I think I said to one, I'd sell my mother before I'd sell this horse, which he wrote in his article and sent to my mother. She didn't appreciate that. But I felt that way. Like it wasn't, and people sometimes were surprised when they asked why I was doing it. They're like, are you raising money, spreading the word, raising awareness? Is it a race? Is it a challenge? And I was like, just me and these guys just going. And there was no rules, no schedule, no, we have to be there by this time. So there was one day, I think it was in Illinois, and it had been really hot. And he just was off, he wasn't lame. He just was kind of cranky. And I was like, we got to take a few days off, but you have to tune into that. And so, yeah, but thank you for that. Yeah, they were extremely precious to me, and still miss them and think about them all the time.
Oh, I can only imagine. This is the coolest part about the book, is it includes photographs from your adventure with the
It does.
animals. And
Yep.
it's such a nice compliment as you're reading the story, because you can like visualize it, and you can kind of see what you're wearing, because it was a different time. And it has maps in it too, like it tracks where you went, and it really helped me visualize the adventure. But how did you decide what photos to choose? Like I'm imagining you had a lot, but then when I read your question, the answer is a little different. So like,
Yeah.
talk about the photos.
The photos, that was with a lot of help from the people at Trafalgar Square, Rebecca and Martha, because, like I said, nowadays, I have young adult children, and they're constantly taking, like, they must have a bazillion pictures. And I enjoy that too. I like having pictures and memories and so on. But, back then it was like the roll of film that you sent off somewhere. So most of those I never saw till the whole journey was over, because I'd send them home to my mom. And sometimes people would ask to take our picture quite often, and I would give them my mom's address. So it was kind of like piecing it together. But when we decided what goes in, it was kind of like the overall feeling of the book, not like one specific story, but just, there's ones where we just people we met along the way. There's ones where you sort of have that feeling of open space. And then Rebecca, I think it was, put together sort of this sequential version of them. And she sent them to me, and I was scrolling through, been doing this for years. I was the one who picked them up, and I start tearing up because it did. I know it's like my own pictures, but it gave you that sense of the story. I mean, like the beginning, and even Rainey still even wasn't fully shed out. Like you can see he always got a late shedding and a nice sleek coat in the winter, but you could sort of see this progress. And I laugh at even myself because seeing them laid out like that, I even thought like I look wilder, like, you know what I mean? So it's like, so it was hard to choose, but I think we did well. And I've heard from several people too of who are actually not related to this book, but had worked in the, publishing and book industry. And they said, 3 sections with color photos is wonderful to see these days because a lot of them don't do that. So
Mhm.
kudos to those guys at Trafalgar Square for that, because I think it did add to it because it's real and it gives you the sense like, oh, here they are. That's really them. So yeah,
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 and who wouldn't look wild after traveling across the country? And I mean, it was just so neat to see you. Like the dog, Gypsy would jump up in the saddle with you and ride along, and all your pack and like what you were wearing,
yeah,
like the cut off t-shirts, and I mean
yeah.
sunglasses, like
Oh,
it
and
was,
that in the sunburn. But it's funny because it makes me laugh because I was so I was just me, and I'm 5'2", and I was, smaller than everything. And I was very vulnerable. Like you become tougher and you rise to what you need to do. But I still was just a person who was happy to meet people and hear their stories. And, somebody would offer to tell my parents they met us and so on. And that part was wonderful. But there was one place in Missouri where someone was trying to set up this chain of people. And this one woman said, no, I don't want them here. And someone later told me she was scared of me. And it just moved me in such a weird way because I've never been told that in any way. And it made you sort of sometimes see yourself through other people's eyes. And I think sometimes if you step outside what we consider normal, sometimes that's scary to other people. Obviously I'm not scary, but it just makes you realize how people view things differently sometimes. So
yeah, that's a great point. So I know that when you first started the story, it was like 1,000 pages long, and you have a lot of stories from this trip that didn't quite make it to Distant Skies, which is a great story. It's got a beginning, a middle, and end. It's an adventure. It's like Indiana Jones female but real, like kind of thing.
oh, I wish.
I know, but I was kind of clamoring for more when I finished the book, and and I know you have more photographs. I'm wondering, is there a possibility for a companion piece, or would that be something you'd even consider?
I love that you asked that. You could probably tell I was happy that you asked that because what you write, you're a writer, and what more could someone ask than
Mhm.
what better thing could someone say to you than I wish there was more? That's a great feeling to have people say that. I actually had 2 separate people say to me because they heard me talk about cutting out stories, and they're like, "If they're in a form, could you email them to us?" And I didn't, but I thought, I don't know, that touched me that was there. And I always say the trip home, which was not by horseback, I always joke that's a whole other little novella because
Oh
that was a little
yeah.
bit crazy because we went there with no idea how to get home. So that became this sort of funny, kind of neat story of people kind of pulling together for us. So, like I said, I'm always open to that and I would love anything like that. But this particular story is very linear. It's a journey. And you know something? Cutting out stories was one of the hardest things in any writing I've ever done. I have them and who knows, it's something to always see what happens, I guess. So yeah.
I would love that. I think that would be really
Well,
cool
thank
companion
you.
piece. And I'd love to hear about reacclimating from having been on this wild long adventure and being with the horses to what it was like going back to normal. You know what I mean? Like I
Wow.
would love to hear that story too. I mean, that
I will say, Carly, that one might not be such an uplifting story because it was a struggle. I think that it was harder to adjust to coming back than it was starting out on that trip. But there's this feeling like, do I like where do I belong? Kind of, I sort of I don't want to make myself sound like the Mowgli in the Jungle Book, like I'm this wild child, but I felt so connected and so like I was where I belonged. There's so many stories, some that I cut out because they were so similar about me just like at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, just starting out and the roads in front of us and the sun's coming up and just feeling like we belong there. This is we're part of this, and so to come back and like have to find a job and drive a car and all that, it was hard. And there were times that I thought, well, Rainey's still young, maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that. But there's also this sense that I wanted a normal life too. I never was a I wasn't a great girly girl that dreamed of weddings and stuff like that, but I loved kids, and the normal life calls to you too, but it was definitely an adjustment for sure.
Yeah,
Sometimes I think I'm still working on that.
I'm sure. I mean, a lot of the moments in the book that really touched me was that piece that you experienced with your little herd and recognizing the landscape and just being so in the moment and away from have tos. I was just like glowing with love for my horses, having experienced your love of your animals, so
Well,
I just,
thank you.
it was cool. uh
I appreciate that.
and we've talked a lot about the animals, like so many people came together for you around this grand trek that you took. Like there are so many great stories of people like showing up and helping you and banding together and giving you refuge and places to stay and all those things. Did this journey restore your faith in humanity?
I feel like it didn't need to be restored, but it certainly confirmed it, if that's
Mm,
the right word, because it probably was a little bit naive, but I felt, and we've all seen this, like at a horse show or something, there's someone that has a horse that won't get on a trailer or some kind of issue and is competitive, and horse people can get very competitive, but as soon as there's some issue like that, everybody's pitching in and coming over, or a sick horse, or things like that. And so I had seen that, and I had faith in that. Like there's part of that book trailer where it says I started out with faith in the people we'd meet along the way, and those were not my words, but those captured exactly what I did feel. And I remember trying to reassure my parents that, because obviously they were very worried.
oh
But
yeah.
I honestly had no idea how much that was true. Like I figured somebody would say, "Oh, you could camp in my barn," or "Here's some water for your horse." I had no idea that people would just be woven into the fabric of this story. And you'd be surprised how many of them are still a part of my life,
Hmm.
which says something too. But I didn't know that it would be that way, and how strong and how much they were a part of this story. But also it taught me one of the most valuable lessons, which was it was my dream, and it was no one's job to make it happen. It was up to me and my animals, and how I took care of my animals, and sometimes fate, because you can just have bad luck sometimes too. But trying to make it happen was up to me. So it made me strong, and it made me feel like I can handle whatever comes up. But on the same time, and it's like one of those contradictory statements, it also taught me how much people need each other. And
Mm.
that was a valuable lesson, because I felt starting out like I'm independent, I'm doing this on my own. And it certainly was not on my own. I was alone a lot, but I was not on my own. You sort of felt this support that was behind us, and rooting for us. And it's a powerful thing to feel.
Oh,
I treasured that, and I learned to appreciate that. So, like I said, there's a loan, and there's a different kind of alone. So I will never be able to state the value of the people that, some of it planned, some people that saw us in need, but sometimes it could be something as simple as, because much of this was during hot weather, and
mhm.
I can't tell you how many times people would drive by and then turn around and come back, and they they just would say, "Do you need anything? There's a store up ahead, but it'll take you all day to get there. I can bring you a cold drink or something." Just somebody that took time out of their day, and we'll never know their name or anything, but there were so many things like that, and it touches you to know. And I do want to say, I hear this a lot too. Well, that was back then. It's different now. And I always try to make sure to say this. There are always people adventuring, including with horses. I'm not naive that we can cross paths with bad people and bad things. I know that's out there, but I think this story reminds us that most people are good, and most people see you in trouble and want to help. So
Right.
I believe that, and I think that kept us going a lot of times.
Oh, yes. And this story sums all that up so well. And you're right. I think we all have to believe a little more that there's kindness and gentleness and connectedness among us all. And your story is
Yeah.
an example of that. And it's still alive and well today, especially with horse people, because you're right. We'll step in anytime anybody needs anything or just check in. It was just on a trail ride a couple weeks ago. and a girl's bridle broke. And we all banded together and figured out a way to get it fixed so she could get back to
Yeah.
her trailer. So yeah, I think we touched on this a little bit, but I still want to give you an opportunity to talk about it a little bit more. What are your thoughts on the healing power of animals to satisfy our need for connection?
I tried to explain that to someone if I've had a lot going on or problems. I said, when I get in the saddle, I can just sort of feel this moment where you just go, and it
Hmm.
doesn't solve whatever the problem was. It doesn't magically give you an answer in the trees or something. You just have this moment where that falls away for a few minutes because what you feel is the strength of the horse, the sound of the clip clopping hooves, like we said, the leaves in the trees. And it might clear your mind a little bit. It might be cleansing. And when you come back, again, like I said, you don't magically have the answer to whatever the problems were, but you sort of have this cleansing feeling, I think. And I don't even think it has to just be horses, because I know a lot of people are intimidated by horses or can't afford horses and so on. I feel the same thing comes from dogs. There's so many people that are amazed when they're sad and they say their dog came over and just sat with them. You know what I mean? And I was like, oh, yes, they know, like they somehow know. And cat people, same thing.
Now, the title of your book, Distant Skies, can you tell us where that came from and what it means to you?
Well, distant skies came from the actual words came from a poem that my friend Reed, who you do meet in the book,
Hmm.
wrote to me and sent to me while we were still on the road and traveling. And the line that I put in the book was, someday I'll return to a normal life, have a job, be a mother and wife, but I'll always remember in my mind's eyes those old horizons and distant skies.
Oh,
And I just thought that was beautiful. And it was also literally true because we were always riding west, because there were times, this is kind of going off on a sidetrack, but sometimes people said, how did you not get lost? And there was a few times I never considered my self lost because I didn't have a place I had to be. But if you are going west, just follow the sun, you know what I mean? And there are certainly parts of our country from the middle on that it's just this great horizon. So I loved it both literally and for what it meant. I just like I couldn't think of it in any other way. And
mm,
then the subtitle, which is An American Journey on Horseback, just sums up how truly American I feel, that pull to travel west, the pull to be outdoors, the pull to sit by a campfire under the stars and to have a relationship with a horse. I know that that has happened all over the world, but to me what made it truly American was that for anyone, but especially as a female, to have the freedom to try to make that happen. And so it's truly an American journey. So that's how those two things came together.
oh, it's perfect. I
Yeah.
wanted to give you the opportunity to explain that because I think the
Yeah.
title is perfect. I wanted to shift a little into like how you got this book written and talk a little bit about your strategy around writing. This is a personal thing that you're sharing, like a personal story, something very important in your life. What hurdles did you personally face when you were writing so openly about your life, your emotions? Like, how did you overcome that stuff and push through to get this book done?
That's a great question because I didn't, again, starting out, I didn't feel that I didn't realize how much the emotions had to be part of it. Like,
Mhm.
for an example, there's that story early on, and it was in Western Pennsylvania on Crescent Mountain when this winding road and this big, really bad storm came. Very, very frightening and very scary. And I thought, now there's an adventure story because we were in this bad spot and the thunder and lightning, like that's a lot of stuff to work with for a good story. But I couldn't write it without saying that I was scared, that I was saying prayers, that I was thinking of my parents. And people think that I was kind of joking when I said I put myself on the outside because that was a true thing. Because don't you agree that's true? I knew that if I got hit by a car, they would try to save me. They would call an
Mm.
ambulance. But if Rainey got hit, like people would stand around, not know what to do. So like there's all this part. And then just to use that as an example, that was full of emotion, fear and worry and relief, when at the end, so on. So that is just a way to say like all these stories were somewhat about what I was feeling.
Mhm.
And so that was the first step. And I had to just sort of say, this is how it is. And I remember at one point actually sitting at this exact table writing and just sort of sitting back. And you have those moments, and I'm sure you've had them too, where you have moments where you write something and you just feel great. You're like, I love that line. I love how I wrapped it up. I'm so thrilled. And then you also have these ones where you just look at it and you're like, why is, who am I kidding? Who's going to care about this? You know what I mean? Like complete opposite ends of the spectrum. But then I kind of got past that because I thought these feelings, fear, homesickness, loneliness, joy, elation, friendship with people and animals, those are things we all feel and all relate to. You don't have to be on a big adventure to have that. And so I just kept going. I just felt like this is the true story, and these emotions are so entwined with the stories that it'd be impossible to write it without showing that. And it's funny because this is what, interestingly, what people responded to, because the first wave of book readers were people that I knew and people connected with the publisher, and that type of thing, that where they had promoted it. I'm sort of hitting the second wave now where non-horse people and non-animal people are
Mm.
reaching out to me. And that's been kind of fun too, because you see like a different thing they relate to. Like somebody else might say, I got thinking about my once in a lifetime horse and how lucky I was or something. And now these people are like, oh my gosh, when you were crying, I started crying. So they see like different sides of it. So, the emotions just had to be part of it.
Well, I'm glad that you conjured up your cowgirl courage and put this book into the world because I found it incredibly human. I could relate in so many different places in this book. I could relate to the dream. I could relate to the calling. I could relate to the emotions that you're experiencing. I could relate to the loss of the boyfriend, which I felt really sad at that part. And, but then
Yeah.
I could relate to the meeting of Reed, and I could relate to it was just so relatable and told in an emotional adventure way that it was just a really great read. I was telling you before we started the call, like I sat down and I read it in a day. I could not put it down. And I love books like that. So thank you for
Thank you.
giving this gift to others.
And emotions in that event, that trip, not just the book, but the trip itself, ran the gamut from
Oh, yeah.
every, like, from just like, there were moments that I was like, what am I doing out here? Like, just this is insane. I'm insane or something. And then, there's these times you'd asked later on about moments, and there was just these sometimes quiet moments or gentle moments that you were touched by, and it just felt joy too. And just every possible emotion that you could feel is touched that story at some place during that trip. So
For sure. And like that reminds me of this question I wanted to ask you because as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, as a woman alone with my beloved animals to care for in the wilderness, I think I would have been full of an incredible amount of anxiety. Like, how did you manage to keep your head level during the ride, given some of the challenges that you experienced? I mean, there were so many successes, but there were also a lot of challenges. And like, I would have been like, I would have put my head down and figured it out, but I don't even know that I would embark on something this massive, like how did you keep your head level?
well, I think the answer to that is, first of all, it was like being a parent or a teacher in a classroom. You realize, like, I'm the one that has to keep us all
Mm.
safe and make it right. So that was an aspect of it. But also, when you pare down life, when you think about this lifestyle that I had put us in, you're not thinking about, did I pay that bill that's due on my card or whatever? Am I past due for an oil change? Did I get that day off at work? Like all of that stuff in our modern world fell away.
Mm.
And it was pared down to these basics of safety, food, water, and remembering that I was out there for pleasure.
Mm.
And so I think much of the what we consider is anxiety is from all those things that weren't on this trip. You know what I mean? And the other thing was, and I talked about this with a well-respected horsewoman that said, you were living like a horse because you were living in like an animal because you were not in a crazy way, but because it was all in the moment. Like
Mm.
horses don't go, I hope she's not late coming out here tomorrow morning. I hope she gets me a new saddle pad, like that kind of thing. It's not the future, it's not the past, it's the here and now. The scaling away and the falling away of all those other things brought me into that. So when you're battling, say, a storm, because that was one of the big things. I couldn't write every story, but storms was something we had to deal with a lot in the Midwest. You don't go, oh, if I don't get out of this will be too wet. And what if I can't, what if I get hurt? And what if, you just have like that moment. Okay, there's lightning. We need to get off the road. There's an open barn. I don't care who owns it. I don't care what they say. We're going in it. You know what I mean? And it was like that moment you address that. Not what am I going to do if a guy comes out and yells at us for being there? Not, you just, it's like each moment is in and of itself. And so when there is situations that could be stressful or dangerous or someone, you just deal exactly with that. And so that helped you move forward. And so as a whole, like I said, when I think of that time, there were certainly times where I had fear and so on. But as a whole, when I picture that time, it was actually really peaceful and calm because it was just me and my horse walking along, under the wide blue sky and saying hello to people that would stop and talk. And, the stressful situations got thrown into it here and there, but it certainly was only a fraction of the time. So
Oh,
you just deal with that.
that's amazing. I mean, like that, I feel like that's how life should be more like, rather than stressing about this big glob of stuff, just take it
Yeah.
moment by moment, solution by solution. Very much what this book is rooted in is just that. I mean, and what a life lesson at 23. What a life
Yeah.
lesson to be able to
Yeah.
absorb that and take that into the rest of your life.
Take
Uh,
the little steps to get to the big step. Don't look at the whole big thing because that was another thing that that was daunting. Like, especially those first few weeks when I was trying to adjust. I'd be in someone's house, like they'd invite me in and they'd have the news on. And I've told this before, sometimes they show the weather and it would have the whole map. I
oh,
was literally like, look at that, because I go like, we're here and we have to go here. And I narrowed my focus down to tomorrow. I hope to get to this town 22 miles down the road, and that's all I would think about, that day, the next day. And so I tried to teach that with my kids that, break it down and just keep taking those small steps. So, but I think they did get tired of lessons learned from the horses. So, anyway,
but that's a great lesson actually, and that lesson from the horse ride is applicable to writing a book, right? Because it
it's true.
you can look at the mammoth thing that is the journey of writing a book, or you can take it down to step by step. Where am I going to get to tomorrow? And that's how a lot of books. That's how you get your book written, right? And
I think you're right, because there
yeah,
were days when, especially when I had sort of a rough draft and you knew it wasn't anywhere near, complete. And we had a busy house and I worked part time doing most of that. And so, and still spent a lot of time with the animals. And I just remember there were days and there were times that like days and days and days would go by that I didn't touch that book,
mhm,
especially raising a family. And then all of a sudden I'd say, you know what, no matter what I have to do, I just want to take that one piece, even if I didn't take my computer and like print it out and mark on it and write it. And there were times there's a nice park down the road from where I live, kind of natural, just hiking and a little pond and everything. There's nothing else there. And there were times I would just go down there, literally with a piece of paper and a pencil, and say, at least I got that much done. And
mhm,
then the next day I would like, now I can rewrite that. And it just kept inching forward.
mhm.
And it took, when you asked if there were things I wish I knew before I started, I was like, there's things that's good I didn't know, because when I started, if somebody told me how long it would be, I might have been quite kind of like looking at the map of the United States. And also, oh, and by the way, when you do finally finish, it's going to come out during an unbelievable pandemic and the whole world's going crazy. So it's probably good. There's some things we don't know at the beginning.
That's true, but I think it was the perfect read for the time, to be quite honest. It was a story
Thank you.
of hope, a story of perseverance, a story of connection. I mean, it was this book came out, I think, at the perfect time. Like I said, my favorite book
Thanks.
during the pandemic. What advice would you give to a fellow author who aspires to write?
To get it down. It's sort of like a builder can't build a house until he has a pile of wood. This book was in me, and I said, I'm going to
Mhm,
start writing it down. And if anyone could see those first writing down, they'd be like, there's no way she ever published anything, because
mhm,
it's literally like, just get the story down, because then you have that to work with. But that was the main thing, was just getting it down. You have to get past, especially with a memoir, because it's personal, what other people think. You know what I
mm,
mean? And that's a hurdle, because you're like, well, I don't know if I want to say this. I don't know if I want to say that. And then you just have to go, people either like it or don't like it, but it doesn't change what you need to write. And so it comes back to like emotions, and some of them negative, and that type of thing in the book. You write real, as I say, and then hopefully people respond. If they don't, at least it's real. It's what you don't want to make up a memoir, so that would be my other thing, to just, get something down and then make sure you just put it out of your head that someone might be reading it someday. Just write it how you need to write it. Then you can play with it.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect advice. And then what's been the best part about having written this book? And then of course the hardest part, which is obviously getting over ourselves to get it out into the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, do you have a thought on those two things?
I want to just touch on saying if there's a hard part briefly, because that's a shorter answer. And I consider myself very blessed and very lucky because so far there haven't really been hard parts. And I even had, the publisher and different people warn me, like, once something's out in the world, you just get those internet trolls and
Mhm.
somebody's going to say, oh, that was cruel to the horse, or, oh, whatever negative. And I've, knock on wood, been very lucky because any feedback and so on I've gotten has been extremely positive. But I think what has touched me and moved me the most, and I almost have to be careful I don't tear up just talking about it, was when people, first of all, and if the people at Trafalgar Square, Rebecca and Martha in particular, will probably laugh because I think Martha's quote was, "I hear we dragged you kicking and screaming into social media," because I just had no interest in it before. And it's not that I'm old school. Obviously, I use computers and everything, but I just, time is precious, and I just I wasn't drawn to it.
Mhm.
And so I see the positive side of being able to have people connect you from all over the world. And I think I used a few examples there, but when I started getting the first few readers commenting and having a way to reach me, which was through Facebook at first, my heart just, it was beyond what I could have ever wished for, because I heard first from people that just read it and said, I've been really struggling because it came out like right in the middle of this whole pandemic and right
Mhm.
before the election. And so it was just like such tumultuous times. And people said, it just took me away and it reminded me of what our country is about and that most people are good. There can be happy endings. Just like to feel that we brightened someone's day in a small way was so rewarding. And then there was that feeling, and again, I hate to overuse this word, but it's really what so much of this is about, is the connection. I think I heard from a sailor. He was out at sea and he sent me a picture of himself on the deck and you can see the ocean. And he said, "This, I feel like I'm in the middle of our country with you and Rainey and Gypsy and Amanda." And it
Mhm.
just it just melted my heart. And people that, had been sick, and I think I talked about one woman, and she said, I saved it because I don't want to finish it, because every day, like at the end of the day, that's my thing I look forward to. And to realize that these little stories and these times where they just seem like small moments with my animals and I, that are touching people or brightening someone's day or encouraging them, it's beyond words how much that moves me. And also, as sentimental as it sounds, it keeps them alive for me, these animals. And both of my parents are gone since, the time of this journey. And just to think of people, saying their names or picturing them or something, it just is beyond words how much that means to me.
Wow. The other amazing thing, and you talk about connections, after you took this journey, you started being asked to speak. So you speak on your adventure frequently. So, like,
Yep.
this has kind of become your life and sort of your profession and what you do. Do you want to talk a little bit about the speaking engagements that you
I
do?
do. The speaking engagements started as soon as I came back. Back then, there was no internet and so on, but we were, on the news and different media, quite a bit while it was happening. And I started getting asked to speak about it. Something about it just resonated with people. You know what I mean? Even, and like I said, interestingly, at first it wasn't even horse groups. Like eventually, like 4-H and so on would hear about it. But it just started like, one of them was this group of, uh, community college teachers. They were trying to study people that had sort of done unusual things and how they stick with it and what that kind of thing, and supervisors and administrators of the New York Education Association. So I started getting paid to do it. And and I don't want to make it sound like a full-time job or anything. It wasn't that, but it was like this sort of extra income that I felt the animals had earned. So I, even though I was still a young person, I felt you don't just take that money and go shopping or something. So I saved every penny of it. And then my parents also helped me. And that's how I got the land that my horses moved to. And then
Oh,
eventually we built our house in the land I'm sitting on right now in this house. So they are just, that journey, and these animals are just the gift that keeps on giving. It sort of encouraged me to not let go of the dream of writing a book. The fact that people were interested helped me believe that the book might be worthwhile,
Oh,
for others. Yeah.
absolutely. And the gift that keeps giving these
Yep.
animals. And I mean, imagine, like you said back, like you met people on this adventure that said, I once had a dream.
Mhm.
Imagine what your life would be like if you hadn't taken on that thing that was calling you forward. I mean, it would be
Yeah.
you'd be in a completely different place. I mean,
Yep,
it's
that
just
is absolutely
incredible.
true. That is absolutely true.
Yeah.
I feel Rainey and Gypsy and Amanda in all that I have and all that I do still. Yeah, I really do. Yeah. Even my husband, I put that in the end. That's how I met my husband. He just saw me somewhere and he goes, "Aren't you that girl that rode the horse?" And we just started talking. So like, thank you again, Rainey. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So it's like, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It just gives me chills. It's like just so special. So if you have a dream, everyone listening, and it's calling you forward, grab onto it with both hands and go, no matter how scary it is, because look at what a dream can do. And this wasn't about fame for you. This was just about you wanted to be out there with your animals. You wanted to follow the
Yep.
trails and you had this awesome adventure. And all this stuff is just aftermath of following your heart and
Yep.
being
It
with
is.
your animals that
It
you
is.
loved unconditionally. Man,
And I think it's important also to say that it was still a worthwhile dream, even if it wasn't successfully completed,
right.
because by the time we had probably the first 3 or 4 weeks on the road and we crossed our first state line, West Virginia, I started to that was when that living in the moment started. And I remember that feeling like we know how fragile it is with horses and especially on the road. And if he started coming up lame or there's a million things that could have gone wrong, but I just remember at least I at least I rode a horse from New York to West Virginia. At least we had that day, of sunshine and going along the cornfields. Like I learned each day to go, this was worth it. Just even getting to here. But we just kept getting farther and farther. But even if dreams don't come true the way you pictured it they would, they're still always worth having a piece of it or having known you tried. So
Oh, completely, totally.
yeah.
And I want to say to listeners, there is so much more in Melissa's show notes because she sent such beautiful, detailed answers to the questions that I sent over to her. So please check those out. But I have to ask right now, what are you curious about? What's next? I know things are just starting to kind of like grind for Distant Skies, and when with things opening up, you'll probably be doing a lot of engagements around Distant Skies. But what's next? Maybe that follow-up book.
Well, keep pushing for that. It can't hurt. I'm really looking forward to being able to travel and visit the root of our journey because I think whether it's in fiction or nonfiction, I think a lot of the small towns and backroad places don't get noticed or mentioned a lot. I remember once there was a mystery book out and it mentioned my hometown here and people were buying it just because of that. And not so much about buying it, but I think it'd be neat for people in those places that don't get noticed as often to know that they're in the book. So there is that. So I look forward to maybe doing some readings or so on in some of those places. And also I love to write. I know you probably understand this because I remember a time this just thinking, even if this never is a book, I'm still just happy to be working on it. It just felt like a good part of my day, like writing. I was like, at least I had that in my day, and I feel that way about writing. So I have a children's book that is like kind of complete, just needs, to be polished up, and is of course horses. And
Yay!
it is a true story actually. So I don't want to say too much about that till we see what happens with that. But I'm also dabbling with my first uh, attempt at fiction, which is a whole other ball game.
Mhm.
So I don't know how that will be, but I'm having fun with it. So again, trying to make the time. I have a horse and a mule. Now I mentioned Starbuck earlier. He's a great horse, but I have been kind of searching for a special horse to step in and as he gets older and slows down a little bit. So that's always time consuming and always a project. So that's kind of what I'm working on now.
That's exciting. And what I like about all that too is it's in the present moment and it's just what's next. That getting lost in the writing I can completely identify with. But I can see it now. Hire a documentary crew, follow the route you took with Rainey, and do a book tour through all those places and stop and see everybody. And then you've got your next piece where it tells a story of, what
That
happens.
is actually a cool idea.
Yeah,
And
I
you
could.
know what else I found out, Carly, now that I'm not 23 anymore?
Uh-huh.
There were some people that I thought were really old and I found out they're still around and I'm like, he's that old farmer, he's still around. He was probably like I was 23. He was probably like 30 something. I was like that old guy, So yeah, it would be fun to do that.
Oh my gosh, it'd be so cool. And you could even do it on your own, just with an iPhone, or
Yeah.
take your kids. Your kids could do it for
Yeah.
you. Interview the people that you
Yep.
met and hear them talk about this crazy girl that rode through their town and stayed in their barn with
Yeah.
a horse, a
Wouldn't
dog,
that
and a
be neat?
mule.
Funny thing like that. I was in New Mexico and I stopped at Klein's Corners and I got talking to the woman that worked there, and we were talking, and she said, "What are you doing out here, by yourself or something?" I said, "Well, I'm heading to Gallup, but I like to visit some of the places that I went on a kind of a neat journey a long time ago." And she asked about it. I said, "Well, I was on a horse," and she goes, "Oh, well, there was some girl that rode through here, but that's like 30 years ago, so that wasn't you." And I was like, "That was me," because it was probably 10 years ago that I had that experience. So it's neat, and this is another weird thing that would be interesting to film. Things that you think are permanent, because I have gone back over and visited most of this, like roads and bridges. You're like, I know there was a bridge here. And I'll get talking to someone in the diner and they're like, oh, the state closed up that road, milled up the road, like something like that changed. There'd be another thing like in New Mexico, there was a place we stayed for rodeo riders called the Horse Hotel. Just
Yeah.
had old wooden painted on sign. Wooden sign still hanging there.
Oh
So
my
like
gosh.
it's a strange thing to revisit after this long, because some things that you think are permanent and unchangeable are gone, and things that seem fragile and are still there. So it would be interesting to film. Yeah, so we'll have to see. Maybe I can be my own documentarian.
Oh my gosh, it would be really incredible. Like, just to start at the beginning and go to all those places and like talk about what you remember and what's there and what's not. And I can so see it. So I could see this. You could even like write up a pitch and get some documentarian to maybe take on the project. That would be
That's a
really
cool
neat.
idea.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you for that.
yeah, and it's a testament to America though, right? Because this is
It
America we
is.
know, and like the whole book made me feel closer to my country too. So this is just an extension of that. So I could
Yeah.
totally see this working. But I really do feel like we could have talked for days and days and days and days. And like I said, I absolutely love your book and I appreciate so much of your time. We'll have to have you back on the show after that documentary gets made. But in the meantime, can you tell listeners where they can find you and your books?
Yes, thank you for asking that and to have such great questions, and you're so inspiring yourself and you're supportive authors. I so appreciate that.
Hmm.
But one of the best places to find distance guides is at horseandriderbooks.com, and that supports small business. And I just want to mention that Trafalgar Square Horse and Rider Books is also an all women owned business too, which is really neat. And they have been great to work with. Frequently, they have sales with discounts and free shipping and stuff. So it's always good to support small business. But then it's also available in the normal places like Amazon and Barnes and Noble. We recently found out it's at Target.com and Walmart.com too, if you like the big guys.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And so our local brick and mortar bookstores have it in stock, pretty available wherever books are out there. And if someone wants to reach out to me, I am on Facebook, Melissa Priblo Chapman, and same thing with Instagram. And there's an email address on that too. And I love to hear from people and I answer everyone. And I so appreciate that someone takes the time out of their day. Cause I don't know if you do this, but I sometimes will be moved by something I read and say, I'm going to write something, and then you move on and you don't do it. So when people take the time to do that, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that means so much to authors. And I will make sure to link to all those places in the show notes so you can get directly to Melissa. And don't forget to check out the show notes because the answers to the questions that she sent over are so touching and so moving. I felt like I was reading Distance Guys all over again. So I will include those there so people can hear the parts of the interview we didn't get to because I wanted to talk to you about all this other stuff. So Melissa, thank you so much for the gift of your time. I really appreciate you being on the show today.
I appreciate you inviting me. I think you are great at what you do, and I've enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure, and appreciate your support. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. I hope you enjoy these Q&A sessions with wonderful equine authors who love all things horses and riding, just like me. Visit my website, carlycadecreative.com, where you can read the show notes, and make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now. This podcast is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you so much for your support. Want a free guide to secrets of horsebook authors? Gallop over to carlycadecreative.com/wisdom to have author advice delivered instantly to your inbox. If you are an author who writes about horses and would like to be spotlighted, please let me know. Visit my contact page at carlycadecreative.com to fill out a request. I'd be happy to have you on the show too. Thank you for tuning in to the Equestrian Author Spotlight podcast. See you next time. I'm your host, Carly Cade. Creative writing makes my spurs jingle.